It was a creed written into the founding documents that declared the destiny of a nation. Yes, we can. It was whispered by slaves and abolitionists as they blazed the trail toward freedom. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
It was sung
by immigrants as they struck out the distant shores, pioneers who pushed westward.
On the Boston Red Network via WBRN Radio. The subject of this episode is the Trump-Ukraine Impeachment Inquiry Report. This is a report by the House Select Committee on Intelligence pursuant to Resolution 660. In consultation with the House Committee on Oversight and Reform and the Foreign Affairs Committee. The hearing is now moved to the House Judiciary Committee, which it will ultimately, on Wednesday, they will have several law professors there speaking there. We were just looking at the composition of this committee, headed by Representative Schiff of California. And we see Andre Carlson. He's from Indianapolis. He is on the committee. We were just looking at people of color or African Americans on there. Also is Mr. Castro of Texas. And let me see who else is on here. William Hurd. He's an African American that is ex-CIA type. He's also from Texas. And I don't see any. Nunez. But Nunez is. That's Devin Nunez out of California. He is the ranking member on this committee. He has some problems with conversations to Rudy Giuliani. We won't labor on that. That'll be sorted out over at the House Judiciary Committee. Now, the Committee on Oversight, Carol Maloney is the chair of that, and the late Elijah Cummings was the chair up to his death. Just looking at some of the Eleanor Holmes Norton is on that committee. I just noticed she being here on the committee, that is. And let me see who else is looking very, very... Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley of the Commonwealth, and Roshana Tlaib of Michigan or of Detroit. She's also on this committee here. And let me see, anyone else could miss some people. That happens all the time. But anyway, that is 3 or 4 people on that particular committee, the Oversight Committee, and then we'll move on to Judiciary Committee. We don't have that obviously up here on this particular episode, but looking at some of the, and this is the Foreign Committee on Foreign Affairs. Representative Meeks, an African American from New York, is here. And let me see who else. I don't want to miss anyone. That Hispaniat of New York, he's a representative there. Parts of Manhattan, Ian Omar is also on that committee. She is from Minnesota. And let's see, who else? Juan Vasquez, Gomez, they obviously are Latinos. One that's not in a people of color, James Sensenbrenner. He's retiring from Wisconsin, long-serving person there. Don't see any more on the committee right now that I recognize their names right off. There is a representative from the Commonwealth. Anyway, I lost him. Doesn't really matter that much, but we'll highlight the executive summary here and then go. That'll be on page 12. We will append this, incidentally. We just sort of highlight this report because in the press, this report reflects evidence governed through far by the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and so forth and so on. Is accumulation of investigation that started in September 2019 and intensified over the past 3 months as new revelations and evidence of presidential misconduct towards Ukraine. sustained by tireless work of more than 3 dozen dedicated staff across 3 committees. We issued dozens of subpoenas for documents. Testimony took more than 100 hours of deposition from 17 witnesses to provide the American people with the opportunity to learn and evaluate the facts themselves. The Intelligence Committee held several public hearings, 12 witnesses there, including 3 requested by the Republicans. And that totaled 30 hours there, and then we'll move on here, won't get into whom there. In his farewell address, President George Washington warned of a moment when cunning, ambition, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the powers of the people and usurp them for themselves from the reins of government, destroy thereafter the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. And as a history of what the founding fathers said, Alexander Hamilton explained that impeachment was not designed to cover only criminal violations, but also crimes against the American people. The subjects of its jurisdiction, wrote Hamilton, of those offenses which proceed from misconduct of public men, and now it could be women, in other words, from the abuse or violation of some public trust. There are a nature which may, with peculiar propensity, be denounced politically, as they relate chiefly to injuries done immediately to the society itself. And I won't get into what some justice said here, but get past this and get to the actual counts themselves, a brief history of what happened here. And most people are aware of the phone call with Zelensky of the Ukraine. And on October the 3rd, 2019, the president publicly declared anew that other countries should open investigations into his chief political rivals, saying China should start an investigation into the Bidens, and that President Zelensky, if it were me, I would recommend that they start an investigation into the Biden. When a reporter asked the president what he hoped Ukraine's president would do following the July 25th call, you heard that over and over, he seeks to dispel any doubts about his continuing intention. Responded, well, I would think that if they were honest about it, they'd start a major investigation to the Bidens. This is a very simple answer. And that is where basically this unfolds. And he sums it up. This is Adam Schiff, otherwise known as Little Adam, as Shiftless Schiff by DJ Trump. From Benjamin Franklin, of all people, he was asked, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy? He responded, a republic if we can keep it. Very famous quotation of Ben Franklin. In the executive summary, the impeachment inquiry into DJ Trump, the 45th president of the U.S., uncovered a month-long effort by President Trump to use the powers of his office to solicit foreign interference on his behalf in the 2020 election. The president demanded that the newly elected President Zelensky publicly announced investigations into the political rival Biden. And he also wanted a conspiracy theory for the conspiracy fanboys and fangirls out there, that actually was Ukraine that interfered in 2016 election, and not the Russian Federation. President Trump engaged in an unprecedented campaign of obstruction of this impeachment process, needlessly due in large measure to patriotic and courageous public servants who provided the committee with direct evidence of the president's action. The committee uncovered significant misconduct on the part of the president. This is a resolution 660. Now, section 1, the president's misconduct. The president conditioned a White House meeting and military aid to Ukraine on a public announcement of investigations beneficial to his re-election. That summarizes virtually everything, and in short, he pitched to the President Zelensky, spoke with Gordon Sunderland, who had donated $1 million to his campaign. he was the ambassador to the EU. Ambassador Sondland relayed a message to President Zelensky 6 days earlier that assurance to run a full and transparent investigation and turn over every stone when necessary. Sondland understood that these phrases referred to two investigations politically beneficial to the president: re-election campaign one into former Vice President Biden and the Ukrainian gas company called Vigorously, which his son sat on the board. You've heard this before. We won't go out there, but there's $400 million in defense aid in the pipeline here. Ukraine would soon prepare to purchase Javelin anti-tank missiles. That's from the U.S., part of a selling package. He immediately responded with his own request. I would like you to do us a favor, which was to find out what happened with the alleged Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. And that was bright on his mind. And in comes Alexander Vindman. He was a staff member of the NSA, and he participated in one of the public hearings. The call recorded would not remain hidden. On September 25th, 2019, facing immense public pressure to reveal the contents of the call and following announcement the previous day of formal impeachment requirement, the memo was released. President removes anti-corruption champion Yovanovitch. That is Marie Marshall Yovanovitch. She was the ambassador to the Ukraine. She was known throughout the Ukraine. She is a Ukrainian speaker, and her peers are progressively advocating for anti-corruption. Her effectiveness anti-corruption earned her enemies in Kiev and in Washington. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State George Kent testified in praising Yovanovitch. Anyway, The Hill, one of these patsy newspapers, published several op-ed attacking Ambassador Yovanovitch and former VP Biden. And this is by Lysenko, who was widely viewed as corrupt. Now, he was a Ukrainian prosecutor, no more there. And anyway, in runs Giuliani and his associates. This is Sean Hannity. Hannity showed up in the situation, and also Mike Pompeo. Now, he's a Secretary of State. They all appear. His hand-picked agents begin the situation. Another big title here. He congratulated the Ukrainian leader on his victory, complimenting him on his country's Miss Universe pageant contest. This is something DJ Trump used to run himself. Shortly after the conversation, he asked the VP Pence to attend the inaugural of Zelensky. Pence confirmed directly to the president his intentions to attend during a phone call. At the same time, his personal attorney Giuliani intensified his campaign to pressure Zelensky. And Inner Secretary Rick Perry, who has now left the administration, led the American delegation to the inaugural. Sunderland was there. And Kurt Volker, he was the Ukraine to negotiate there, and also Colonel Vindman, who they also attacked. President freezes vital military assistance. There was an authorization, $391 million in security funds to Ukraine, $250 million in funds administrated by the Department of Defense, and $141 million in funds administrated by the Defense Department. And on July 18th, the Defense Department said that they would send the money on. On July 3rd, the OMB blocked a congressional notification which would have cleared the way for the release of the $141 million. President conditions a White House meeting on the investigation. He talked to in Toronto, Canada, convened a meeting. This is Volker, and referred to the Giuliani factor in President Zelensky's agreement with the U.S. or engagement. Excuse me. On this part, Giuliani made clear to Ambassador Sondland, to Ambassador and Volker, who were directly communicating with Ukraine that a White House meeting would not occur until the announcement occurred. And in pops Mick Mulvaney, the schedule of visit after Ukraine initiated investigation. President's agents pursue a drug deal next 2 weeks. Sutherland and Volker closely worked with Giuliani, senior Ukrainian and American officials, to arrange the phone call. Ambassador Sutherland later testified Mr. Giuliani was expressing desire of the president, and we knew these investigations were important to him. And they breakfast at Trump Hotel, of all places, there. Giuliani and his associate Lee. Anyway, this is some of the coastal characters here. Pressed Ukrainian president to do a favor. You've heard this in the vast reports. We'll move past this fairly quickly here. Ukraine inquiry about the president hold on the assistance. Evidently more cast characters here. Catherine Kroc, to ask in her confidence about the whole. Kroc was surprised at the effectiveness of the diplomatic tradecraft, noting that they found out very early on that the U.S. was withholding critical aid to Ukraine. By mid-August, before the freeze on the aid became public, Vitamin also received inquiries from officials at the Ukrainian embassy. They didn't know what was going on, so we'll move past this particular part here. The president's scheme unravels. By early December, President Zelensky was ready to make a public announcement of 2 investigations to secure a White House meeting. On the 9th, the House committee announced an investigation of the scheme by the president and his personal attorney Giuliani. Later that day, the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community sent a letter to the chair, Schaaf, and ranking member Nunes, notifying them that a whistleblower complaint had been formed. We don't hear any more about wanting to unveil who the whistleblower was, because his complaint was secondhand, but it's all been verified now, so they are not really worried about that particular incident there. Whoops, just a second here. Section 2. The President's obstruction of the House of Representatives impeachment inquiry. The President obstructed the impeachment inquiry by instructing witnesses and agencies to ignore subpoenas for documents and testimony. Now, this is normally it. Constitutional authority of the House Oversight Committee. Article 1 of the Constitution gives the House of Representatives sole power of impeachment. Framers intended impeachment power to be essentially a check on the president who might engage in corruption or abuse of power. The Congress is empowered to conduct oversight and investigation to carry out its authority under Article 1. The Supreme Court has made clear that the Congress, that incidentally is the House of Representatives, authority investigates include the authority to compel production of information by issuing subpoenas. That's long been established law. President, and now they cite over subject of impeachment inquiries. The President Andrew Johnson, he won by escaped by 1 vote, 2 votes. Richard Tricky Dick Nixon and Bill Clinton, recognized and to various degrees complied with the request. President Nixon, for example, agreed to let his staff testify, but then appeared John Dean involuntary in the Senate Watergate investigation. They would testify on oath. They would answer fully all proper questions. Nixon also produced documents in response to subpoenas as part of the inquiry. When Nixon withheld the tapes, etc., heavily edited, he did send a record up there. They approved obstruction, and of course Tricky Dick surrendered and left town. The White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, sent a letter to the Speaker, Pelosi, confirmed that the President directed his entire administration not to comply with House impeachment inquiries. Mr. Cipollone wrote, President Trump cannot permit this administration to participate in what he called a partisan inquiry under any circumstances. He also refused to produce any and all subpoenaed documents, and these are the individuals involved were called as the House impeachment inquiry, 10 of whom did so in defiance of duly authorized, and they mention here Rick Mulvaney, Barr, the Attorney General Bolton, Eisenberg, the legal advisor there, Michael Ellis, Preston Wells, Griffith, the Director of International Energy Environment, Charles Kupperman, former assistant to the president, and Russell Volt, Michael Duffy, assistant to the National Security Programs Office of Budget, Brian McCormick, assistant director of National Resources, and Rick Perry, otherwise known as Rick Perry and the Rock. All right, we go on here. The president's intimidation of witnesses for Marie Yovanovitch, who served there honorably for decades as a diplomat and anti-corruption person around the world. On the 60th presidents, Bill Taylor is named here. Also, Alexander Vittman, he's a colonel, lieutenant colonel. Jennifer Williams, who is Vice President Pitt's advisor there. It's a federal crime to intimidate or seek to intimidate any witness appearing before Congress. The president engaged in this effort to intimidate servants to prevent them from cooperating with the Congress. Now, he went on Twitter here, publicly attacked, intimidated witnesses who came forward, and these were the people I just named that he attacked, which is a major charge against him. Finding of fact, D.J. Trump, 45th president, acting personally and through his agents within and outside of the U.S. government, solicited the interference of a foreign government of Ukraine in the 2020 election. In doing so, the president placed his personal political interests above the national interests of the United States, sought to undermine the integrity of the U.S. Presidential election process, and endanger U.S. national security. In furtherance of this scheme, he directed and acted through his agents within and without the government and outside the government, and sought to publicly pressure people to advance this public political objective. President Trump engaged the president of the Ukraine. As part of the scheme, President Trump, acting in his official capacity and using a position of the public trust, he also used the internet. On Biden and his son, he ordered the suspension of the $391 million. He used the power of the Oval Office of the President to exercise his authority over the executive branch, including his control of instruments of federal government to apply increased pressure. Here, this is well written, so forth and so on. Number 6, in directing and orchestrating this scheme to advance his personal political interests, he did not implement or promote or advance U.S. anti-corruption policies. In fact, he sought to pressure and induce the government of Ukraine to announce politically motivated investigations. Number 7, by withholding vital military assistance, diplomatic support for strategic foreign partner engaged in ongoing military conflict, Trump compromised national security. Number 8, faced with a revelation of this action, Trump publicly and repeatedly persisted in urging foreign governments, including Ukraine and China, to investigate political opponents using the executive office of the president exercising this authority. Refused to produce records, directed branches to defy lawful subpoenas. And Section 1 of the president's misconduct, we'll just highlight one of these. The president forced out the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Ambassadors serve at the president's preference, but she was there in the Foreign Service for 33 years. This is Marie Yovanovitch. Was told by the State Department had lost confidence in her. In fact, he was in the recording. He said she was bad news. Removed the ambassador, left a vacuum. Note about that. Anti-corruption ceremony interrupted to recall anti-corruption ambassador. Now, this happened in the Ukraine. It was on April 24th. Some of this actually, Giuliani, on behalf of the President Trump, led a smear campaign to oust the ambassador. That was part of that, largely directed by Rudy Giuliani. And these two characters here, Lev and Igor Thurman, they were in, at least one of them was in court in Manhattan. They are being indicted and further investigated. Where Giuliani ended up in this thing, we don't know as of yet, but he did collect hundreds of thousands of dollars, evidently in legal fees. Both conspiracy theories served in the personal interests of Trump. Now, the first one would serve to undercut Special Counsel Mueller's investigation, which was still underway when Giuliani began his activities. This is this conspiracy theory about the Ukraine being involved here. And Giuliani met with various people. Smear campaign accelerated in late March of 2019. This is where Ambassador this is Solomon, somebody else, sorry about that. And it involves Creole people. Concerns about President Trump kept the State Department from issuing a statement of support. Now this is Yovanovitch here, and the Undersecretary of Political Affairs, that was David Hale, an email identifying her concerns about the false allegations. Ambassador Yovanovitch turned to U.S. Ambassador for the EU, Gordon Sutherland, for advice. Sutherland, of course, didn't come up with any. And ultimately, Secretary Pompeo refused to issue a public statement in support of her. So that in itself would be interesting to see what the committee does. Ukraine, this was in the election of 2016. Barely through this report, but we'll hit the high points. President provides no rationale for recalling the ambassador. This has to do with the ambassador, a lot of things, puts Giuliani and Three Amigos in charge of the Ukrainian issue. Now, this is Giuliani and Perry in that as the Three Amigos, and Kurt Volker. And Dr. Philona Hill, she was also at the hearings, but decided she didn't have any confidence in this operation either. Roll on through here. Takes a little while to get through here, but we'll. New York Times had quite a few articles on this, and this is in their report. Russian President Putin and Hungarian Prime Minister consulted Trump on Ukraine. So instructs Vice President Pence to not attend. We had received a call from assistance from the Vice President's staff, and he didn't attend the inauguration. That's what came up earlier there. Pence canceled out because of that. I think Texas Perry went instead of him. Some of this has been, again, reported. I'm not trying to sound like an echo chamber here, but past this, President froze the military aid. We won't go into that section, but it is spelled out here in quite some detail. I didn't want to edit this. Continues the whole, let's see, despite agents' concerns about the legality of it. Now, this is the Impound Control Act here, unlike his predecessor Nixon, undertook impoundments that were not substantial, in some cases permanent, which raised concerns for Congress over it. Article 1, this is a congressional power, in fact, between 1969 and 1972, impounded between 15 and 20% of congressionally appropriated funds in various accounts. To reassert congressional authority over the budget, in 1993, Congress established a Joint Study Committee on Budget Control. The Budget Study Committee's findings ultimately led to overwhelming bipartisan passage over Nixon's veto of the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. Looking back in history, Bill Archer, he was from Texas, a fiscal conservative who served 30 years in the House, including chair of the Ways and Means, remarked the culture then was that the president had too much power and the president abused his power. That's one thing you don't get usually in the press reports, because simply they don't have time. Senior officers failed to convince the president to release aid. That was in August. And this was brought out in the testimonies, but not in the detail. The president's meeting with Ukrainian president was conditioned on an announcement of an investigation. And that has been brought out in the direct test. They do elaborate here much more than one would expect the elaboration to go. Ambassador Sutherland explicitly communicated the prerequisite of an investigation to the Ukrainians. That was brought out in direct testimony from Sutherland himself, and Sutherland is deeply in this. Now, I don't know how they will do this. In another breakfast meeting here with Giuliani, I believe at the Trump Hotel, and various other people that spoke with people at various other venues here. I won't go into what they had to say. President asked Ukrainian president to interfere in 2020 election, investigating the Bidens and 2016 inference. This you got in public when Marie Yovanovitch there. And again, we get back into this American cyber security firm, CrowdStrike, moved the DNC service to Ukraine to prevent U.S. law enforcement from examining them. The theory is often referred to in shorthand as CrowdStrike. Why would they move them to Ukraine? Anyway, various people enter here. Tom Boser, he's the president's former Homeland Security advisor, stated publicly that CrowdStrike theory is not only conspiracy theory, it's completely debunked. Dr. Hill testified at the White House, including Dr. Boser and the former National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, spent a lot of time with CrowdStrike conspiracy theory to Trump. So in other words, this plays over at Hannity, but it doesn't play anywhere else. Well, we got past the first 100 pages here. We congratulate ourselves on this. Jennifer Williams had listened to nearly a dozen phone calls between the president and other heads of state, including a call with Zelensky. She said listen to the president and was struck by his request relating to VP Biden. Well, unusual and inappropriate is what she said. Now, these stances come from various witnesses, not just one witness or two witnesses, but a bunch of witnesses here. And this is an oral, first-hand type of situation. And this is how the Democrats should make a summary on this, that quotient for the people, as we are attempting to do here. President wanted Ukraine to announce investigation publicly. That was July 25th. We talked a lot about that, and a bunch of texts here that in this, and you can self. There's a lot of evidence in this particular situation. Comparison of draft, Umark draft, Giuliani vote, Sunderland draft, just various things. Quid pro quo. That's it. Necessary to credible. Sutherland and quid pro quo here, and big argument, did he mention the word quid pro? And Biden's son, my voice is about to run out to even pronounce it, but anyway, in these various texts here. Now what they don't have, as we said earlier here, is a voice recording, and I'm very surprised about that. Some contradictions in direct testimony. The president's conditioning of military assistance and a White House meeting on the announcement. Investigations raised an alarm. Well, no doubt this was edited here, and one of the problems is when you start trying to conform the testimony to an event, there's problems. Bolton visits Kiev, K-Y-I-V, that would be the pronunciation, scheduled for the 1st in Warsaw. Bolton testified. He also heard Ambassador, Holmes express about Giuliani's interference, and that was quoted in the larger press here. This report's in a lot of detail, and of course now that the Judiciary Committee is dealing with the legal basis of impeachment, and then we'll hear more hatching out of the formal articles of impeachment, and then of course the justification will be more. My advice is Ambassador Sutherland is the only evidence the committee received indicating that the president denied any quid pro quo on the phone. That was on September 9th, when he knew the cat was out of the bag, as LBJ would say. But as far as the White House attempt that this is by some blogger in the basement, no, it's not by a blogger in the basement of his mother's house or her mother's house, or however you want to put it. This is much, much more involved. The problem with these conspiracies is the more people you get to have a conspiracy, you have to have two or more people acting there, and Bolton resigned on September the 10th. But Bolton has got his Twitter feed back now. We haven't heard anything from him. The hold was lifted. Congress was forced to pass a law to ensure all military aid could be distributed to the Ukraine. So in other words, this was just not one big bill. There was several pieces of it here. And Vice President Zelensky threw some end notes in here. A lot of end notes. And various texts here of Giuliani and Cup. And where these are from. AT&T is mentioned here. And more documents of Giuliani and the White House phone number. And all these calls. And this is some of the stuff that they actually already have, which is well documented here. And let me just, I'm going to zip past it because we're down to 300. We're too far down. Just a second. This is just what the federal courts have said about subpoenas, the laws passed by Congress, obstructing Congress as a criminal punishable up to 5 years. concerning material fact concealing, is punishable by up to 5 years. Intimidation and harassment of witnesses is punishable up to 20 years. Other people are doing a lot of hard time here. And what they do is give a little bit of history here of Andrew Johnson. Of course, you didn't have any of this in Tricky Dick. You didn't have mobile phones and all these records. Even what Nixon agreed to do. And these are some of the people that appeared here. John Dean, who is still around. H.R. Haldeman is dead. And Alexander Butterfield, he was the guy that brought in the deputy assistant of the White House recording system. And John Ehrlichman, he's also dead now. Peter Rodino out of New Jersey sent a letter to Tricky Dick. For example, in the Iran-Contra thing, that was totally different. That was Reagan. And President Clinton sent up his Chief Erskine Bowles, remember him, Bernard Messbaum, and Jack Quinn. Anyway, there's some of the people up there. And Barack Obama, this is Benghazi. People have forgotten that one. Available transcripts. Susan Rice, you remember her. She just got a book out. And Ben Rhodes, almost 1,500 there. And his categorical refusal to comply. We've already went through that. We won't go through what Cicilline said there. This all goes to Mr. Nadler now and his committee. So basically, that is where it ends. And that is where we'll end with this particular situation. This has been the Trump investigation from WBRN Radio on the Boston Red Network. This is Boston Red, the Jerry Pippen Memorial broadcast booth here. I hope this has made it a little bit clear. We will append the entire document as we move on. And one of the things to mention here, polling has shown that basically the nation is split, but more people are in favor now of impeachment than before. Not removal from office, let's make that very clear. But in Watergate, that was the grandmother, granddaddy of them all. It took the nation over a year to get to the point that Tricky Dick should be impeached, and then there was not a agreeing with that, but Trick resigned, and thus they did not go to the Senate trial. When Barry Goldwater or other people informed Tricky that the Republicans had turned on him. Now, that's not the case with D.J. Trump, but Richard Nixon had been reelected. He was not facing another reelection, but his polling numbers had fallen into the 20s. I believe he's down to about 25%. Or was it 35%? Doesn't matter very much. But this was a fellow that was reelected over our candidate, Dr. George McGovern, the late Dr. George McGovern of South Dakota, by quote-unquote a landslide, when in fact he engaged in all sort of nefarious schemes. Now, the 2016 election will go out that merely nefarious schemes, but again, what Tricky Dick did not have at that time, he didn't have voter ID laws. He did have voter suppression, but it was more rudimentary, just stuffing of ballot boxes, that sort of thing was out there at that time. And there was not any social media there for people to rely upon in the Dirty Tricks division. But now the election there was high-tech. We had Cambridge Analytica in. And incidentally, there's a big running feud right now in the UK election, which will be next week, as to did the Russian Federation interfere in the last election. A report is ready, but the conservative Johnson is suppressing it. We're not going to let it out till after the election. And Jeremy Corbyn, who is the leader of the Labour Party, has come up with some documents that he got. We don't know yet, and at the same time, there's some sort of shadowy scheme there that a document has been delivered via Twitter and social media. They're trying to tie that to the Russian Federation. The problem is, and we've been in cybersecurity for quite a while, the problem is with these delivery systems, you can receive an email or whatever, or some website from anywhere. It can be disguised, or people can even travel there. In other words, I could travel to an internet cafe in Moscow and send something out there, or have a compadre send something out that appears that it came from Moscow, or it did come from the Russian Federation, or that it came to Ukraine, or it came from the U.S., or it came from China. And sometimes there's really not a source of it, because again, You can identify things usually by the device. That's where it would be a smartphone, it would be a notebook, a desktop, by something called the MAC number, and that can be disguised and altered. By IP addresses, those can easily be disguised. That's why Jerry Coben, is very, very skeptical of this whole Russian thing, as we are at this mic. We had the Korean thing and the Sony breach, and it turned out the Workers' Party in Korea, the North Koreans, or what do you want to call them, were not the corporate stand. They never really figured out who they were. At least they had not disclosed them. But understand, in 2019, any of the intelligence agencies, whether it be the British intelligence agency, the U.S. intelligence agency, the Russian intelligence agency, any of those, or the U.S. intelligence agency, can invent emails from anywhere. And they can fabricate these things. They can even put you in a picture with DJ Trump in the Oval Office. It's digitally done, very hard to alter it. That technology is here, called facial recognition, and very, very sophisticated stuff. So that's the problem. When you bring in this really sophisticated machine-generated type stuff, including speech synthesizers, all of these various types of algorithms that are available. And this is in pure knowledge work, part of big data. Very difficult to pinpoint where any of this stuff came from, nor its authentication. What you have to do is look at the effects of it, who benefited, who didn't benefit. And in the middle of this is all social media. That happened, incidentally, in the Philippines, Indian election with WhatsApp. These are the things that need to be talked about here, and hopefully the House Judiciary Committee will hold a public hearing on the effects of social media on this entire situation. They could do this, and this entire Ukrainian Trump situation and what's happened. This is very classic stuff. The question we at this mic always ask, why in the hell did DJ Trump do this in the first place? He didn't need to. Period. He could have attacked Joe Biden in traditional ways. Now, as far as Hunter Biden, he's dodgy. They could have done that without the Ukraine. They did not need the Ukraine. All they needed to do was commercials saying that he was placed on the board, and the inference there would have been he only got on the board because of Joe Biden. They didn't need to go any further there, because this information, first of all, only plays to the Trump choir, basically. They have lost suburban people there. They've lost a lot of the independent vote, and they know it. That's what part of the problem is. Can they get any more turnout? Maybe a little more turnout, less than 1 percentage points. Now, as we finally close this out, this whole impeachment thing for the Democrats, they need to gain about 2%. That's where they stand in the scheme of things. This is Boston Red. Good day.